Hey guys, it's Paradise, and everyone is excited to know all of the secrets that Capcom have in store for us in Monster Hunter Wilds, and luckily, we have a ton of information from various different official sources that will reveal some of them. There's a lot of content out there, so we don't want to clickbait you or waste your time, so let's get straight into it and you can let us know what you're thinking of the game so far. In the original reveal from the dev team, they didn't give us a lot of insight about what exactly we would be getting up to in Wilds or the changes that there will be from the previous games. But now they've posted a general overview of what exactly we can expect, and it says there's dynamic, ever-changing environments. It's a story of monsters and humans in a world with two faces, one in which the lands are harsh and unforgiving, where the monsters fight for these scant resources, and another in which the lands are vibrant and brimming with life. We're going to play as a professional monster hunter, protecting the balance of the ecosystem and hunting monsters. We'll use the resources we gain from hunts to craft ever more powerful armor and weapons as we quest to unravel the mysteries of this new land. They say we will experience the most evolved action and improved immersion in any Monster Hunter to date. The game is sounding very awesome and we're super excited for it, and there's a lot to break down from the new locales, gameplay changes, and new monsters. I know we should probably talk about these environmental changes first, as there is some big changes here in Wilds with it. However, we as fans of Monster Hunter are super excited about the combat, and that is what is super important to us, so we're going to go over the combat stuff first. In this new trailer, we got to see a chunk of greatsword gameplay, and it is looking awesome, especially this new dragging stab move that I absolutely love. Along with this, there's another insane move that keeps a monster locked down as you shove your sword in its mouth. This has got us super hyped, and we can't wait to see more of the other weapons in action to see what crazy things have been added. You may be wondering how we're going to pull off some of these new cool moves though. Well, in Wilds, there's a new mechanic called Focus Mode. We actually got to see this in the trailer when the player changes stance and allows them to unleash a massive attack on the monster. Capcom says that Focus Mode will allow you to aim your attacks and guard abilities. You can also use Focus Mode to pinpoint monster weaknesses, which can then be targeted with special new attacks that will deal big damage. This is meant to make it easier to space yourself and aim your attacks during hunts, and Focus Mode will make it even easier for players of all stripes to get in on the hunting action, in Capcom's own words. Well, if you've played Final Fantasy VII Remake, this kind of reminds us of Cloud's Punisher mode, and it'll be very interesting to see how we can aim our attacks on the monster's weak points. There's another mechanic which is linked and expands on this, and this is the wounding mechanic, which you can kind of think like an alternative version of the Clutch Claw from Iceborne. This wasn't explained in the English version of the blog post, but thanks to user Duke Lukewarm, we have a translation of how this system works for both wounding and attacking weak points. For the wounding, this is a new system that will create weak points on monsters' bodies. By repeatedly attacking specific body parts, they will gradually become damaged and then become temporary weak points. If you hit a monster's weak point or wounded spot, you can then perform a critical follow-up attack for massive damage. Some weapons can even time their attacks with the monsters in order to forcibly knock them away, and there are actions that can lead to powerful follow-ups. Guarding against some powerful attacks will also lead to dynamic power struggles. You can actually see in this screenshot the glowing red points, which are the wounds, and they're highlighting where the hunter can attack. And on this other screenshot, you can see what it looks like when the attack is executed. Just from these images, it's clear that this is going to be very satisfying when you pull it off. In the actual gameplay though, we got to see two examples of these focused weak point attacks, and we have previously talked about that awesome greatsword attack that seems to be a targeted point on a monster where you then drag the blade along. You can actually see if you look closely that the wounds are highlighted on the monster just like in that previous picture example, but the more interesting thing is the power struggle that we actually see right at the end of the trailer. This is supposedly a weak point attack and it looks absolutely incredible. Another massive addition to the game is that we're going to be able to switch weapons mid-hunt, as we can carry an additional secondary weapon on our mount that when mounted we can freely switch between. We got to see an example of this when the player calls their mount and then switches from the greatsword to the heavy bowgun to then pull off some mounted attacks. Something that we were curious about though is if this system was restricted to just the bowgun or if we could select any two weapons that we wanted to. And it is confirmed on the website that we can select any two weapons and switch between them, even if it's the same two weapons. But for those of you wondering if any new weapons are announced for Monster Hunter Wilds, Capcom so far have only stated that the 14 weapons in the game are the same weapons that we would expect from previous Monster Hunter games returning to this one with new moves and mechanics. Although it is unlikely that we might get a new weapon, it isn't completely ruled out, as they have only so far said old weapons are returning. They haven't clarified that there will not be any additional ones, but bear in mind this could just be copium, as we personally really want to see something new. But what do you think? Are you hoping for new weapons, or are these new mechanics added to the existing weapons enough? The greatsword and bowgun, however, were not the only weapons that we saw in action. Now, if you watched the trailer and blinked, you may have missed it, but the hammer and longsword on the other hunters during the multiplayer section near the end of the trailer are also shown. The hammer user seems to be decked out in armor with what people are speculating is the furry monster from the trailer, while the bowgunner looks like he's wearing armor from the frog. We only got to see the longsword for about 2 single frames, but it is there. At least assuming it is a longsword and not an insect glaive. Now that we've got combat out of our system, let's jump into the juicy environmental stuff. With a new Monster Hunter game, of course, comes new lands to explore, and Wilds is the new frontier that we will be discovering and uncovering secrets for, and this area is called the Forbidden Lands, and the locale that we saw in the trailer is called the Windward Plains. One of the things we've noticed is that the theme of Monster Hunter Wilds seems to be about change or having 2 different forms for things, and this extends into the environment, gameplay, and just the general combat. Even the logo itself has 2 different monster figures of 2 different forms, one filled in and the other not. As they've mentioned, the dynamic environment is a big part of this, and it seems that Wilds locales will have 2 different states, which we have already seen in the trailer, where one represents a more lush and vibrant locale, and the other represents a more harsh and unforgiving environment. This is combined with the fact that Capcom are banging on about the locales in Wilds being much more dense, deep, and 3-dimensional. For example, in a blog, they've said that the Windward Plains will be the first locale that the investigation team will visit in Wilds in this Forbidden Lands area, and it consists of sandy deserts, swaying grasslands, and twisting rock formations. Currently, we don't know if the game is actually open world like people have been speculating, as the press release and information about the game references multiple locales rather than a single large open world. We will say though it could still be an open world and just have different distinct locales in the region in one big open world style map, kind of like how Horizon Zero Dawn does it, or how Fortnite does it with its multiple biomes. But for now, we are assuming that it isn't an open world, but that the locations in the game are just massive with different areas in them. I mean, I don't know guys, do you think it is open world, semi-open world, or OG Monster Hunter style? Do let us know what you're betting on, as I'm kind of thinking it might be a semi-open world, but we just don't know. It does seem, however, that we'll be able to start quests dynamically just by engaging with monsters, which is actually really cool, and it is shown in the trailer. Another massive theme of Wilds is the living world, as the dev team are trying to create more immersive ecosystems. In a blog post, they say monsters act independently to survive in these harsh environments. In Monster Hunter Wilds, hunters can expect to immerse themselves in a vibrant ecosystem of monsters living in nature, including large-scale groups of monsters that move in herds and packs and even interact with one another. Something interesting that we got a look at in the reveal trailer were the herds, and Capcom has expanded on this, saying you'll encounter not only herds of small monsters, some of the large monsters of the region may also form packs. Each group has its own place in the ecosystem with its own unique mechanics and behaviors. Well, I don't know about you guys, but it would be super funny if when you get to endgame, they have herds of Nergigantes just walking around the environment. And this is now the perfect time to go over all of the monsters that have been announced for Wilds so far, as well as their descriptions for both big and small. The first monster, and one that we've seen a lot of, is Doshaguma, and this is a fanged beast. The description for it says, a rugged, territorial fanged beast that exhibits an aggressive disposition and inhabits a large range. Sometimes it's observed in large packs. This one does look pretty menacing for what we're assuming is a fairly early game monster. We have been calling it Gos Harag's cousin so far, and it's nice to know its proper name now. And next up we have Chatacabra, an amphibian, and its description says, a large species of amphibians that use the adhesive quality of their saliva to affix stone to their forelimbs in order to power up their attacks. This is a really cool looking monster, and it looks like a mix between Puke Puke and Dodogama, which we absolutely love. Interestingly though, they could be giving us another hint that water and underwater combat may be making a return, as this is an amphibian monster. That being said, the Tetsukabra style of monster is normally listed as amphibian as well, so this might not be a proper hint, but we can hope. And then we have Seratanoth, and this has been the point of discussion in the community recently since its actual reveal, as we have seen them be hit by lightning in the harsh environment and kind of act as a conduit for it. This is a herbivore, and Capcom says Seratanoth males protect surrounding females of their species from lightning by catching the lightning strikes with well-developed dorsal horns on their backs and releasing them into the ground. They form large herds with male Seratanoth at the center. And then we have another small monster, and this is Dalthidon, which is a herbivore. This herbivorous wyvern changes its habitat depending on the season. When it senses danger, it will sometimes take a defensive posture and fight back with its well-developed hard shell. And this then leads us to the most mysterious but impactful creatures in Monster Hunter Wilds. That is our mount. This time around, we've ditched the Palamutes for a more nimble-looking creature called the Seikret. Not only will the Seikret provide a quick way to traverse the vast areas of Wilds, but they also enhance and add to the gameplay. We previously spoke about how the player will be able to switch their weapon on the fly while mounted, and to do that you will need to make use of the stash that's on your Seikret, but they can also be used to perform mounted attacks while in combat, and we got to see this in the trailer, both with the player shooting a heavy bowgun while riding, and also doing a jumping dismount attack with the greatsword. With this in the game, there are two things that we think are going to be absolutely epic. We may finally be able to do mounted lance combat that we've basically always wanted to do as a sort of cavalry unit in Monster Hunter with huge raid-style battles. This could be really epic if you are able to ride and attack with it. But you might be wondering, where are the scout flies and are they making a return? There isn't any mention of them yet, but we do know the Seikret will act as a guide and we can use its sense of smell to help us get to destinations on the map. On top of this, a thing that looks like it's returning from Monster Hunter Rise is the ability to use items while mounted, as the blog post for Wild states that you're able to use potions, sharpen your weapons, and gather materials all while being mounted. Another gameplay mechanic that is returning is the Slinger, but this time it's been upgraded to allow us to grab objects and ammo from a distance. We're super happy to see this one back, as we have very fond memories of dropping the rocks on monsters as well as shooting out those flash pods. The functionality seems to remain mostly the same as the blog post says. You can use it to fire rocks, seeds, and other natural ammo, or even use it to trigger objects in the environment. The text on the website also hints that we should be able to trigger certain traps from a distance by grabbing stuff with this evolved version of the Slinger called the Hook Slinger. One of the biggest changes in Monster Hunter Wilds is related to the story and campaign though. We now have a fully voiced main character, but it isn't going to be the only main character, as we now know that our Palico companion will also be voiced. But the real vets of the series will remember this Chad of a Palico that paved the way for Palicos to have their own voice. But don't worry, they don't exactly sound like Naviru. Here's how they do sound.
One of them's got big spikes on its back.
As with any Monster Hunter game, the supporting cast is always interesting, so let's take a look at them as well as our character. We've also seen people fawning over some of these characters online, which is always funny. Firstly, there's the Palico. It says that they're a feline that will support the protagonist as a Palico. It speaks the same language as humans and will greatly support and aid you on your adventures. Another super important character will be the Handler, and a lot of people didn't like the Handler back in Monster Hunter World, but so far the community seem to be fans of this new one called Alma. Here's her description. A guild-appointed handler who relays monster hunt requests and authorizations, and also manages the hunter's quests. Alma will join you out in the field and throughout your adventure, providing useful information and helping you keep track of your quests and supply items. And then we have Gemma, who is featured a lot in the trailer, and she is our smithy. For anything that you need forged, Gemma is your go-to. As the Research Commission smithy, Gemma will be in charge of crafting your armor and weapons. Well, it's safe to say she has an awesome character design and her hair is really cool. Actually, something interesting to point out, people have been saying that Gemma and this character here are returning characters for Monster Hunter 4U, with Gemma possibly being Little Miss Forge, with the older man being Ace Lancer. But lastly, we have Nata, who seems to be the focus of the story, particularly with the necklace that he's wearing. His description says, a mysterious child that accompanies the investigation crew. Nata will play a key role in the game's story. Something else to point out is that it looks like they're taking inspiration from Dragon's Dogma and the companion missions from Monster Hunter Rise, as we know your hunter will engage with other characters in fully voiced conversations, allowing you to get a deeper connection with many of the game's cast. From a story perspective, the Japanese blog post did mention that the game will be as seamless as possible, and that there will not be loading screens for gameplay and cutscenes, which makes me think maybe the game could be open world, but this is a Google translated version of the Japanese blog post, so it could be a mistranslation, we're not too sure. Lastly, if you want to earn some goodies for Monster Hunter Wilds, you'll be happy to hear that if you have a World or Iceborne save, you can earn some extra equipment and gear for your Palico, which make them look like their World and Iceborne counterparts. Whether you weren't blown away by this or you're super hyped, you should know that Capcom have announced that during the Summer Games Fest held by Jeff Keighley, the Monster Hunter Wilds dev team will not only showcase a brand new trailer, but they'll also go into more detail about the gameplay of Monster Hunter Wilds. Maybe this new trailer will be a first look at the flagship of Monster Hunter Wilds, as we know people are very eager to see that, alongside with, of course, a brand new trailer. Either way, it will be very interesting to see the developers talk with Ryozo, and this will be happening on the 8th during the Summer Games Fest digital event, so make sure to be tuned into that or subscribe below, because you know we're going to keep you guys updated.